Okay, let's unpack this. We live in a culture absolutely obsessed, I think, with the pursuit of happiness and comfort. You see it everywhere, right?
Oh, absolutely. Everywhere you look,
Yeah,
social media, the self-help aisles.
exactly. Meticulously curated feeds, this booming industry telling us the main goal is, well, singular.
Yeah.
Eliminate stress, squash anxiety, avoid conflict, just get rid of it all.
Yeah, chase that pure, unadulterated, positive feeling.
But that whole cultural mandate, it kind of sets us up for failure, doesn't it?
It really does. We're almost conditioned to see any negative experience, disappointment, guilt, even healthy anger as some kind of malfunction.
Like something's broken inside us, needs fixing.
Right. But what if those feelings aren't flaws we need to eliminate? What if they're actually powerful, essential signals, things designed, maybe through evolution, to help us adapt, self-correct, and ultimately, well, flourish?
That's a huge shift in perspective. And when you dig into the source material, this critique of the happiness obsession, it's ancient, isn't it?
It really is. You look back at the Stoics, the Buddha, they advise a kind of radical detachment.
Because that happiness you get from just, getting what you want, a new car, a promotion, it's so short-lived.
Exactly. Everything changes. So their solution was basically break those emotional attachments entirely. Stop chasing external stuff.
Which sounds powerful, but maybe a bit extreme for most of us.
Well, yeah, modern psychology suggests that that extreme model is maybe flawed because fundamentally we're social creatures. We need connection. We need attachment.
Right. So if your only goal is this pure, steady state of happiness, you're probably going to be pretty miserable trying to achieve it.
You are. And you see this evolution even within modern research. Think about positive psychology.
Martin Seligman.
Yeah, one of the pioneers. He realized the goal couldn't just be simple happiness. He noticed that seeking what he called a monism of positive mood, just being happy all the time, it's incredibly limiting.
And counterproductive, probably.
Right, it doesn't reflect the reality of human experience. So the focus had to shift, didn't it, to broader concepts like well-being or flourishing.
Which inherently allow for life,
Yeah.
for the complexity and the difficulty.
Precisely. If you aim only for constant happiness, you end up chasing the wrong things. Often it's those external symbols, isn't it? Wealth, status, power.
Things where culture screams are important.
Exactly. And we assume they equate to a good life. But Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, with his work on flow,
Oh yeah, great stuff.
he pointed out how deceptive those symbols can be. The actual quality of your life, it doesn't depend directly on what others think or what you manage to acquire.
It's internal.
It's how we feel about ourselves and what we experience. That internal state is what really matters.
Which perfectly sets up our mission for this deep dive. We're going into the source material to really explore how psychological distress isn't a bug, it's a feature. It acts as a motivational engine, maybe an adaptive compass. Yeah, guiding us towards better decisions, maybe more self-awareness, and hopefully deeper, more authentic connections.
So where should we start? Maybe with the fundamental architecture of that internal discomfort. Cognitive dissonance?
Good call. Festinger's work, right?
Exactly. Leon Festinger formalized this idea. It's that unavoidable psychological discomfort, that kind of mental friction that happens when things are inconsistent.
Like when two beliefs clash or your actions don't line up with your values.
Precisely. If you, say, believe strongly in environmental protection, but you take lots of long-haul flights, that's dissonance right there. You feel that inconsistency.
And the intensity of that feeling, it's not random, is it? The sources say it's linked to how important the decision is.
Absolutely. Directly proportional. If you're choosing between two amazing job offers, both with great salaries, great prospects, the dissonance, that nagging feeling you might have picked wrong, is likely going to be much higher.
Compared to choosing between a dream job and one that's obviously terrible.
Right, because there's more cognitive overlap, more positive attributes shared between the good choices. That makes the rejection of one feel more significant, creating more discomfort.
Okay, so the genius of dissonance, then, is that this discomfort actually forces you to do something. It demands resolution.
It really does. You're driven to mitigate it, to reduce that uncomfortable feeling. And we do this in pretty predictable ways. You could call it psychological alignment.
Like rationalization. That's a classic one, isn't it?
That's the most common route, yeah. You basically talk yourself into feeling better about the choice you made. You emphasize all the positives of the thing you chose.
And conveniently downplay its downsides.
Exactly. And at the same time, you magnify the negatives of the thing you rejected.
So if I splurge on some expensive tech gadget, and then that buyer's remorse kicks in, My brain immediately starts working overtime. I'll focus on its cool, obscure features I might never even use.
It's an investment.
Right, it's an investment. And I'll kind of ignore how much money I just spent. It's like my mind is building a quick defense against itself just to feel consistent again.
That's a perfect example. And Festinger also talked about cognitive overlap as another way we resolve this. It's not just ignoring the bad stuff about our choice.
It's actively looking for common ground.
Yeah, finding similarities between the choices, even if they seemed really different at first. So maybe you chose political candidate A, who's very progressive, over candidate B, who's more moderate. You feel a bit conflicted. You might start thinking, well, they both grew up in the same region, so they fundamentally get the local issues.
Yeah.
You're creating a connection, a similarity, maybe where there wasn't much, just to lessen that internal conflict.
Wow. That drive for consistency really shapes how we see the world, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially with information.
Oh, hugely. The theory predicts that once we make a decision, especially a big one, we actively seek out information that confirms we made the right decision.
Like that classic study you mentioned, the new car buyers.
Exactly. Immediately after buying a car, people suddenly became way more interested in reading ads for the specific model they just bought. They weren't researching anymore.
They were looking for affirmation. See, I made a good choice.
Precisely. And the flip side of that coin, the sort of darker side, is how dissonance drives avoidance.
Avoiding information that contradicts our choices or beliefs.
Yes. And this is so critical for understanding things like confirmation bias, or why sometimes public health campaigns just don't seem to land.
Like with smoking.
Smoking is a perfect example. If someone is invested in the behavior of smoking, but they're bombarded with information about how dangerous it is, that creates dissonance.
A clash between I smoke and smoking kills.
Right. And a common way to resolve that is to simply avoid or discredit the health information. Oh, those studies are flawed, or my grandpa smoked till he was 90. You protect the consistency of I'm a smoker by rejecting the conflicting information.
But hang on, if we're so good at rationalizing and avoiding conflicting information, how does dissonance actually push us towards positive change? Doesn't it just make us dig our heels in?
That's a great question. It comes down to the intensity of the discomfort and also how social structures play a role.
Okay.
If the dissonance becomes too strong, maybe the internal conflict gets too loud to ignore. For instance, if that smoker develops a serious cough or gets a worrying diagnosis.
Then the cost of maintaining the belief, smoking is okay for me, starts to outweigh the cost of changing the behavior.
Exactly. The scales tip. And if you can't quite resolve it internally, where do you often turn?
To other people, your friends, family.
Your group. Social groups are key resources for reducing dissonance. They confirm your beliefs, they provide ready-made arguments, they even guide what you talk about to maintain that group cohesion.
So we hang out with people who made similar choices, who believe similar things, and that social validation eases the internal pressure.
It absolutely does. The group offers the rationalizations you need, and this ties into another fascinating concept from the research: forced compliance.
Forced compliance, what's that?
It's when people are forced, maybe through threat of punishment or strong social pressure, to act in a way that goes against their private beliefs.
Okay, like being forced to publicly endorse something you disagree with.
Exactly. They might change their public behavior to avoid the negative consequences, but crucially, the dissonance that conflict between their actions and their internal beliefs often remains.
So they comply, but they don't actually believe it.
Not necessarily, and that remaining dissonance is important. It tells us the private belief is still there, under the surface. It creates a friction, a potential source of future change or resistance if that external pressure is ever removed. The discomfort is like a record of the internal conflict.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Moving from that sort of cold cognitive dissonance to more hot emotions.
Yeah.
Fear and anxiety, especially within relationships. This is where things get really interesting, I think.
Yeah, the evolutionary perspective here is incredibly insightful. It takes behaviors that we might normally label as, well, odd or even dysfunctional.
Like being super clingy or maybe not being able to leave a partner who's really inconsistent.
Exactly. Attachment theory reframes these not as pathologies, but as understandable, even predictable evolutionary strategies.
There was that case study mentioned, right? Tara and Greg.
Yes, a powerful example. Tamara was described as being deeply anxious and preoccupied with her partner, Greg, and Greg was unpredictable. Sometimes available, sometimes distant.
And this anxiety started spilling over into other parts of her life.
It did. Her her friendships suffered because so much of her mental energy was focused on him, on tracking his availability, and when he would inevitably pull away.
She'd engage in what they called protest behavior.
Right. Calling him repeatedly, checking his social media obsessively, maybe even trying to make him jealous just to get some kind of reaction, any reaction.
Which, if you look at it through a standard lens, seems excessive. Clingy, maybe manipulative.
It can look that way. But through the lens of attachment theory and evolution, it makes perfect sense. Her attachment system, which is wired for seeking security.
Her internal alarm system.
Exactly. It registered the slightest hint of danger, the danger that her secure base, her primary relationship, was threatened or out of reach.
And for our ancestors, losing that primary attachment figure could be literally life-threatening.
Absolutely, a death sentence. So her intense behavior, the constant seeking, wasn't necessarily pathological. It was a high-alert, deeply ingrained evolutionary strategy designed to restore proximity and safety with her most crucial resource.
So the anxiety isn't the problem, it's the signal. It's like a GPS pointing straight at what she needs most, that secure connection.
Precisely. And you see the flip side, too, with people who have more of an avoidant attachment style.
They might avoid conflict because resolving it leads to intimacy.
Exactly. For them, too much closeness can feel threatening. It signals potential engulfment, maybe loss of independence. So sometimes, ironically, the conflict itself becomes a way to maintain a comfortable distance.
So whether it's anxiety about separation or discomfort with closeness, the negative feeling is always signaling something about regulating that distance, that proximity.
It is. And we can zoom out even further and connect this to our underlying biology using Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory.
Right, the different states of the nervous system.
Yeah. Porges argues that our complex emotions are essentially built upon the nervous system's more primitive strategies for responding to danger. Our fear responses aren't just one thing. They evolved sequentially and manifest in different ways.
More than just fight or flight.
Much more. It's hierarchical. First, you have the one we all know, fight or flight. That's mobilization, driven by the sympathetic nervous system. It's for when danger feels manageable, escapable.
Okay, the active response.
Then, if the threat is overwhelming, truly life-threatening, where fighting or fleeing seems impossible, the system shifts down.
To immobilization or freezing.
Correct. This is coordinated by a more ancient part of the vagus nerve, the dorsal vagal complex. Think playing dead.
Which in humans might look like fainting or dissociation, maybe feeling completely numb.
Exactly. It's an adaptive shutdown when active defense fails. But then there's a third crucial layer, especially for us social mammals.
Managed by the newer part of the vagus nerve.
The ventral vagal complex, yes. This is our social engagement system. It's constantly scanning the environment, reading cues of safety or danger in others.
Okay, so how does fear manifest here?
Through what Porges calls cognitive precaution. It's like a temporary, subtle dialing down of that social engagement system. We might pull back slightly, avert our gaze, get quiet.
Assessing the situation.
Exactly. Evaluating the potential danger before committing to a bigger defensive reaction like fight, flight, or freeze. It's the pause, the caution. So fear isn't just one switch. It's this incredibly sophisticated, layered management system.
Wow. And thinking about these deep biological safety systems really highlights what some thinkers call the experiential burden of being conscious.
The sheer weight of existential awareness.
The terror of the unknown. The awareness of death. Becker and Peterson talk about this, right? How that background fear could be utterly paralyzing if we faced it head on all the time.
It absolutely could be. Novelty, the unknown, it instinctively triggers fear. But what shields us? What acts as a kind of buffer?
Society.
Culture.
The collective structure of the group, exactly. Our shared history, our cultural frameworks, customs, rituals, shared beliefs, ways of understanding the world, they inhibit that paralyzing fear.
They give us predictability, a map for how to act.
Precisely. They provide the security of shared meaning, shared reality, protecting us from being constantly overwhelmed by existential dread. And our anxiety often signals when we're stepping outside or feel pushed outside, that protective cultural boundary.
Okay, so let's bring this back to the individual and the moral dimension. We talked about consistency with dissonance, belonging with attachment. Where does guilt fit in? Guilt is fascinating. It acts almost like an internal moral compass, connecting that drive for consistency with our need for social acceptance.
And to really get the weight of guilt, the sources point us towards Freud, right? The superego. It's a tough concept, but powerful.
It is. In Civilization and Its Discontents, Freud explains guilt as basically internalized aggression.
How does that work?
Well, the idea is when a child is stopped from expressing aggression towards external authorities, parents, society, that aggressive energy doesn't just disappear, it gets turned inward.
Turn against the self.
Yes, it establishes an internal authority, the superego, which essentially takes on the punitive power of the external world and installs it inside your own mind.
So we internalize the judge and the potential punishment.
Wow. And here's the really crucial part for moral behavior. Freud argued that guilt doesn't just arise from bad things. We actually did what we might call remorse.
It can come from just thinking about doing something bad, from the intention alone.
Exactly. That's the key distinction. The superego acts preemptively. The fear of its internal punishment kicks in before the transgression even happens.
It keeps you in line from the inside out.
It ensures a kind of moral alignment between thought and action. It's society's way of installing an internal agent to regulate behavior before it gets out of hand. It sounds harsh, maybe, but you can see how adaptive that would be for group living.
But that raises the question, doesn't it? If guilt can be triggered just by intending something negative, couldn't that lead to constant self-criticism? Just feeling guilty all the time? Where's the line between adaptive moral guidance and just pathological self-attack?
That is the inherent danger of the superego. It can become tyrannical, overly harsh, disproportionate. Its main job is control, after all.
So how do we balance that?
Well, this is where more modern relational approaches shift the focus a bit. They talk less about punitive guilt and more about the impact of shame.
Brené Brown's work comes to mind here.
Absolutely. She defines shame as that intense, universal fear of being fundamentally unlovable, unworthy of connection. It's incredibly powerful and, ironically,
The less we talk about it, the more power it has over us.
exactly. So the antidote isn't necessarily to try and destroy that internal voice, that superego or inner critic.
It's self-compassion.
Yes, introducing self-kindness, being warm and understanding towards ourselves, especially when we mess up or feel inadequate, instead of just beating ourselves up with criticism, which is what the unchecked superego tends to do.
And there's that internal family systems model, IFS, that offers another perspective on the inner critic too, right?
Yeah, Richard Schwartz's work, IFS sees these inner critics not as enemies, but as protective parts of ourselves. Often they're manager parts.
Man-inner parts.
Yeah, parts that often formed when we were younger, maybe adolescents, and got pressed into service to try and control our world. They yell at us, push us to achieve, make us hyper-vigilant.
Why? What are they trying to achieve?
They're trying to preempt situations that might trigger deeper feelings of pain, like that coarse shame or feeling of being unlovable. They think if they can just control everything perfectly, we won't get hurt.
So that loud, nagging voice inside isn't actually trying to destroy me. It's trying, in its own misguided way, to protect me from feeling something worse.
That's the IFS perspective. It's a protection mechanism, doing the best job it knows how with the resources it has. Recognizing that seeing the critic as a scared protector rather than an attacker, that's often the first step towards healing, it takes the sting out of the criticism and allows your more compassionate core self to emerge.
Okay, let's shift that lens to relationships again, specifically around conflict. We tend to think conflict is bad, a sign of failure, but the sources argue otherwise.
They really do. Anger, grievances, when they're aired constructively, they're actually essential. They prevent things from building up silently until there's a huge explosion.
Like letting pressure out of a valve.
Exactly. And Daniel Goleman makes a really interesting point, especially thinking about heterosexual couples. He suggests that men, in particular, could benefit from reframing how they see their partner's anger or dissatisfaction. Instead of seeing it just as a personal attack, recognize that often her anger is actually an act of love. It signals that she's still invested, that she cares enough about the relationship's health to try and fix what's wrong.
So the anger is a sign she hasn't given up. It's her attempt to keep things on track.
Precisely. The agitation itself is a signal that something needs attention, needs repair. It's actually a positive sign, in a way, that engagement is still happening. But there's a danger zone.
Stonewalling.
Yes. John Gottman's research on the four horsemen, criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, found stonewalling to be particularly destructive.
That's when one partner just shuts down, tunes out, avoids the conflict entirely.
Physically or emotionally, yes. And Gottman stresses that when a discussion gets so negative that one or both partners start stonewalling, you have to stop immediately, because physiologically you're overwhelmed.
You're flooded.
You're flooded. Your sympathetic nervous system is in overdrive. And the key insight is that you need a real break, not just walking away angry, but an intentional, self-soothing period.
And the sources say At least 20 minutes.
At least 20 minutes. That seems to be the minimum time needed for the body's physical arousal to actually calm down. And crucially, during that break, you have to avoid replaying the argument in your head.
Avoid those thoughts of righteous indignation or innocent victimhood.
Absolutely, because those thoughts just keep pouring fuel on the fire, keeping your body in that agitated state. The physical agitation is the signal, I cannot process this rationally right now. You have to listen to that signal and take the time out to calm down before you can re-engage constructively.
This leads nicely into thinking about how we can leverage aversion and difficulty more broadly for behavioral change. The idea that we're predictably irrational.
Dan O'Reilly's work, yeah. It sounds kind of depressing at first, doesn't it, that we consistently make the same kinds of mistakes in our decisions.
A little bit.
But he points out there's a huge silver lining. If our mistakes are predictable, if we understand our irrational pattern,
We can actually do something about them. We can design ways to counteract our own flaws.
Exactly. He calls these opportunities for free lunches, ways to improve our decisions once we acknowledge our built-in deficiencies. The internal discomfort, the pain of our mistakes, can point us towards better systems.
Like the pain of regret.
Regret is a powerful one. Barry Schwartz's work on choice highlights this difference between maximizers and satisficers.
Maximizers are the ones who need the absolute best option, right? They research endlessly.
Yes, exhausting every possibility. And they are far more prone to feeling regret afterwards than satisficers who just look for something that's good enough.
So the maximizer buys a new TV and then spends weeks agonizing over whether a different model might have been marginally better.
Exactly. That constant if only, that gnawing feeling, it causes real psychological distress. But that pain, the fear of feeling that regret again.
It can be used adaptively.
Yes. It can signal that maybe your decision-making standards are unrealistic or unhealthy. The pain can prompt you to shift towards a more satisfying approach, setting realistic criteria, making a good enough choice, and moving on. It's a behavioral realignment driven by the aversion to regret.
And how we interpret failure is also key, isn't it? The optimist versus pessimist thing.
Huge difference, yeah. Goleman talks about this in terms of emotional intelligence. When a pessimist faces a setback, like missing a big sale at work,
they tend to internalize it. I'm just bad at this. I'm incompetent.
Right. They see it as personal, it's my fault, permanent, it's always going to be like this, and pervasive, I mess everything up. And that leads to helplessness, giving up.
Whereas the optimist?
The optimist interprets that same painful failure differently. They see it as situational. The market was tough. I used the wrong approach this time. Temporary. I'll get the next one. And specific. This one area needs work.
So they don't take it as a reflection of their fundamental worth.
Exactly. By framing the failures as external and changeable, they avoid that debilitating self-criticism. They can learn from the mistake, adjust their strategy, and crucially, as Gorman puts it, they can spawn hope for the future. The painful experience becomes useful data, not a final verdict.
Okay, so if we know we're predictably irrational and prone to bad habits, we can actually use that knowledge against ourselves in a good way.
Right, by intentionally making bad habits harder to perform. It's like flipping James Clear's habit formation laws on their head.
Instead of making good habits obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying.
You make the bad habits invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying. The key is often increasing friction.
Friction.
Yeah, increasing the number of steps, the amount of effort required to do the bad habit. If you want to cut down on mindless scrolling on your phone.
Maybe delete the app or put the phone in another room.
Exactly. Or take the batteries out of the TV remote and hide them somewhere else if you watch too much TV. You're leveraging your natural laziness to work for you, making the default action the better one.
And this idea leads to what you called a commitment device. That sounds powerful.
It really is. A commitment device is basically a way you lock your future self into a better course of action. You restrict your own choices ahead of time, knowing your impulsive self might make a bad decision later.
Like Odysseus tying himself to the mast.
That's the classic mythological example. A more practical, modern one Airlie mentions is the ice glass method for curbing impulsive spending.
You literally freeze your credit card.
You literally put your credit card in a glass of water and put it in the freezer if you suddenly get the urge to buy something online impulsively.
You have to wait for the ice to melt to get your card.
Right. And that delay, that physical friction and inconvenience, is usually enough time for the initial impulse to fade and your more rational self to regain control. You're using a physical constraint to manage a psychological vulnerability.
Fascinating. Okay, let's look right down at the level of the nervous system itself. Pavlov's work, we usually think of dogs salivating, but there's more to it.
Oh, much more. His work showed how fundamental inhibitory processes are. Learning isn't just about forming connections, it's also about learning not to react. Negation is critical.
Inhibition as a necessary difficulty.
Exactly. He found that this internal inhibition could actually be used therapeutically to restore balance in an overexcited or unbalanced nervous system. The process of extinction, stopping a conditioned response, isn't passive forgetting.
It's an active process.
It's an active, energy-consuming process. The brain has to actively work to suppress the response. And when an animal learns differential inhibition,
Like learning to respond to one specific sound, but not to a slightly different sound.
precisely. That ability to precisely concentrate the inhibition, to make fine distinctions about what not to react to, is highly adaptive. It requires focus and control.
And this focused inhibition has broader benefit.
Pavlov observed that concentrating inhibition in one area could then irradiate or spread, beneficially affecting other overexcited points in the nervous system, helping restore overall balance. So learning to intentionally negate or inhibit responses, learning what not to do, is a fundamental part of learning and adaptation. The system needs those downs, those inhibitions, to function properly.
Okay, so wrapping this all together, what's the main takeaway from this deep dive? It feels like a pretty radical reframing of common experience.
I think the takeaway is really clear, isn't it? Those uncomfortable feelings we spend so much time and energy trying to avoid or eliminate, the dissonance, the anxiety, the guilt, regret, conflict.
They're not defects. They're not bugs in the system.
Not at all. They are often the most valuable, most functional feedback systems we have. They're signals.
Yeah. Dissonance pushes us towards consistency, makes us rationalize, or maybe eventually forces us to evolve our beliefs if the pressure is high enough.
Right. And anxiety acts like that evolutionary alarm bell, trying to keep us safe, pointing towards our need for connection.
Guilt as an internal moral compass, keeping us aligned with our values or social rules.
And the pain of regret or failure. That provides the necessary data, the friction to help us set better boundaries, recalibrate our goals, maybe adopt more realistic standards. Our supposed dark sides are actually incredibly informative. They're like an instruction manual if we learn how to read them.
Which brings us back to that idea of control and environment. B.S. Skinner's point seems relevant here.
Absolutely. He argued quite forcefully that the goal isn't really to achieve total freedom from control because our environment always shapes us, always controls us in some way.
So the goal is freedom from certain kinds of control.
Exactly. Freedom from aversive control, manipulative control, control that harms us. And he warned that when would-be controllers use non-aversive methods like rewards or manipulating positive feelings, our sense of freedom can actually become unreliable. We might not even notice we're being controlled because it doesn't feel bad.
So what's the alternative?
Well, just like we accept our dependence on the physical environment and actively redesign it, build houses, create tools, Skinner suggested we need to do the same with our social and psychological environment, instead of trying to destroy or escape control entirely.
We need to consciously redesign our environments.
Yes, redesign them to minimize those aversive stimuli, those triggers for predictable irrationality, those setups for unnecessary conflict. Make the environment support our better selves.
That feels like a much more proactive, maybe challenging stance than just trying to feel better in the moment.
It is. It shifts the focus from just managing internal moods to making fundamental structural changes in our lives, our relationships, our habits.
So the final thought for you, our listener, building on all this, how can you use this newfound understanding of your own so-called dark sides, your predictable patterns, your emotional triggers, the things you tend to avoid?
How can you use that self-knowledge not just to cope, but to intentionally redesign your personal environment, your routines, your relationships, your information diet for more beneficial, self-directed outcomes?
Because maybe that internal distress isn't just something to be medicated or suppressed. Maybe it's actually pointing directly to the parts of your life that need a thoughtful redesign, not just a quick mood adjustment.
It's time to stop fighting the signals, perhaps, and really start listening to what they're trying to tell us.
Absolutely. That was the deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.